Give me a break, Dynamisk, in conversation with curators, artists, museum directors, art dealers, entrepreneurs, and everything in between. An ever-growing series of vibrant and unique conversations with pioneering individuals from the art world. I am Angeliki, welcome to Dynamisk. Give me a break, Dynamisk, in conversation with Pam Evelyn. Led by impulse, instinct, chance, and frustration, Evelyn scrapes back the paint and reiterates her gestures once again. A constant cycle of renewal over several months. The drips, streaks, and smudges, layers, and heavy textures that dominate Evelyn's canvases as non-representational forms have the capacity to appear as recognizable suggestions of figuration and landscape. Yet her work refused to hold fixed meanings. So we're here at Pace Gallery today with Pam Evelyn. Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation. I know we've been in conversation for quite some time, so it's really great to sit down and be with your beautiful work around us. So I'm super excited for this.
Thank you so much for coming. Looking forward to it.
What sparked your interest in abstract painting? Do you find abstract painting allows you to express yourself in ways that other forms of painting or other mediums may not? What draws you to paint as a medium?
So I feel like I landed on an abstract way of making incredibly early. And it wasn't sort of a decision whereby I was thinking, oh, I'm going to shed any notion of figuration or something more descriptive. But instead, it was just this natural inclination towards that way of making. And I have sort of thought about it a lot. And I just came up to the conclusion that my paintings are figurative, but in their own sense. And instead of it relying on something more physical, instead it's actually trying to get into the nitty-gritty of the event or the notion of something instead of what's on the surface. So that's my way in. Yeah. And I think oil paint lends itself very naturally also to that notion of making. It can be sort of manipulated in many ways, and it stays wet for a long time, so a gesture can be touched up or subtly shifted, and I like to become very sensitive to those small minor shifts in nature with paint.
Yeah. Beautiful. Your works are often very vibrant of color. Yeah. How important is color for you and in your work?
So with colour, I think that it's something that I've learned to try and harness and understand the nature of more and more, and I think there's a long, long way to go. I think that being sensitive to light, atmosphere, not only in my own paintings, but also when I look at other painters or filmmakers. There was this, I was looking at one of Herzog's filmmaking for a while, and there's this documentary about how he sort of puts together his films. And I think that there's actually a conversation that you can even be interested in filmmaking and it actually comment on how painting you use light. Yeah. But my paintings, the light source comes from behind, so there's almost this glow because the mark is solely quite on the surface still of my paintings. The light source comes from behind, and I'm interested in shifting that and taking it outside of the canvas, so the glow is not just from within. And I'm intrigued to know what that does to colour. But at the moment, there's a sort of physics and laws behind it that are quite subtle, but they do exist within my paintings, and I try and stretch that as far as possible.
You paint over several months, constantly applying, layering and scraping paint from the surface of your canvas, at once creating and destructing. Please tell me more about this process and the importance of it in your work.
Yes, so that's a really good observation, because I think that over time I realised the significance of almost like a destructive element that is necessary in a lot of my paintings. I mean, in the smaller works, I try to allow that first mark to exist where this combustion is less evident, to understand the notion of the mark without that always taking place. But in the larger paintings, I think there's this collapse due to the scale, the vast scale. There's these moments on the surface where information sinks, or one side of the canvas doesn't relate to the other because of this vast scale. And so one side has to give in to the other for the other to exist. So I think also the scale really does exaggerate those internal combustions that happen. But I used to feel like it was something to try and avoid, and I thought that it was a comment on me maybe not understanding painting or not being confident with painting. But then actually when I gave in and I allowed that to happen more and more, and to sit more uncomfortably with the paintings, I realised that actually there's a significance to it, and these wounds that exist within the painting's composition are quite important to the end result. And these things that exist early on in the painting do seem to have this importance later on. So I'm slowly becoming more comfortable with that.
With the process.
Scraping back that, yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's so interesting to hear, and also to see it, to witness it at the final result, and to be able to see that there's been this sort of push and pull element. So
totally. I mean, the weird thing for me is seeing those paintings in their final form. Sometimes I feel like I'm never going to get there, and then realising that I do eventually get to this point where there is a resolution, and I do play with what resolution can even be. So it doesn't have to be this kind of finished, polished, presented painting, but there's actually different notions of that. But yeah, it's because when it's really happening, when things are really not working, it does feel like there's just no hope. And it's just good to know that, when I come to this show, it's like, okay, I got there. I got there in the end.
Pace Gallery states that your work recalls the vitality of abstract expressionist painters. Is there a particular artist or period of art that inspires you? And furthermore, how important is art history to you in your work as a painter?
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the abstract expressionism reference, because they're brilliant painters from that time, and I think that abstract painting and in that notion was really kind of they were ambitious, and there was a real kind of look at Barnett Newman.
Absolutely.
And that the ambition in his painting, and also his ability to really take everything back and allow very subtle vibrations in his paintings to exist. I'm still learning a lot from those painters and what they achieved then. But I think that, I'm still very caught up in modernism. I think that as a painter, you sort of end up going backwards and backwards and backwards. And Lee Krasner's a brilliant painter, and then you look at Bryce Marden, and you see this sort of chain reaction that goes on. and then someone like Susan Rothenberg, who's sort of slightly outside of any context in those conversations, but incredibly relevant. So I think at the moment what's interesting is it's just this soup of
the different influences.
Yeah, very much. And I don't have one specific time that I think people tend to categorize my work visually to maybe abstract expressionism, but I think that my interests go much further back. And I lean on painters like Soutine, whose landscapes, I think that his mentality to painting, I remember reading that he got so arrogant in his success because he wasn't successful, and all of a sudden he became successful. He would just have a brush, chuck it back, and pick up a new one, that sort of attitude. So I find his work very intriguing. So yeah, there's many different painters I take from, and I'm still finding new ones right now, all the time. So it's constant.
And I think something that is so amazing with your work as well is that it doesn't have to be placed where it sits yet, because you're a contemporary artist. So you're still working away, right? So you're taking all these different influences, but you're also very, very much making your own way and path.
Yeah, totally.
So that's something beautiful too. But it's nice to have these different references, of course.
Yeah.
Your current exhibition at Pace Gallery in London displays new paintings made over several months between London and Cornwall. Do you find that the location where you work has a profound effect on your paintings? And how do the two vastly different locations of London and Cornwall inspire your work?
For the last 5 years, I've moved a lot. I worked in my parents' garden for a while, and I used to commute up to London. So there was a conversation there, and then I had a residency with Portsmouth Studios in Cornwall. So I had a nice amount of time down in Cornwall, and the significance there was that everything sort of opened up. I was very much used to working within the white walls, and information was more internalized and invented and projected onto these white walls or bare canvases. Whereby then when I went down to Cornwall, I had a studio that was very open and made of glass mainly, and I had these views that were vast. And all of a sudden, my sense of looking was thrown outwards. So subtly, I think that did shift things, and in my paintings, these barriers were sort of broken, and obstructions that were once in my paintings, slowly I'm kind of breaking through them. So the sense of place has always affected my work, but mainly when I went to Cornwall, there was a huge shift in my idea of how to make. And there's a big history there of plein air painters who would go outside, make their work, be exposed to the elements. And I did sort of a lot of that, but mainly in drawing. But just getting a taste of painting in that way kind of affected my understanding of how a painting can be made and how they can exist in different mindsets of making.
Often your paintings are very large, some ranging to more than 3.5 meters in height. Pace reflects that the large scale of this work emphasizes your paintings as living, breathing canvases. How important is the size of the canvas to your work, and can you expand on the idea of your paintings as living objects?
So I do paint large scale, and I've sort of always been drawn to painting large scale. When I was younger, I'd sort of have these large pieces of canvas on the floor, and that was sort of my way of working large scale, even though I didn't have a big enough sized wall. And these paintings, I've worked on the floor, on the wall, and the large scale sort of has this very stubborn physics to it. Because it's so large, the gravity in the canvas is exaggerated, because the scale, basically. Everything, you can feel the weight, and to throw that off, usually I have to turn the canvases around or work on the floor just to have a way in.
Yeah.
That's not, forced just by the weight of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm interested in that tension, and I think that being forced to have to stand up to it and see what, almost in retaliation, things can come up that are quite unexpected, and I've always used that to take painting further and surprise myself. And then small scale's always coexisted, and there's always been that dynamic, either in drawing or on smaller canvases. But I think that these paintings in this show draw from maybe elements in the larger scale work, and just sort of reiterate it and isolate those moments.
I wanted to comment on that, because it feels like when I think of you, I think of these large bodies of work, and then coming down here and seeing these smaller ones, it almost feels like unique little, elements of something larger, that you really focused on.
Yeah, I think because things can almost become lost in large scale, and in some ways that can also be a little bit of a you can disguise things and you can get away with things large scale. Yeah. So small, when you work small scale, it reveals things, and I think that my way of understanding some of the large scale elements, to take it back to something small and to really get an idea of what's going on with just that one moment or movement is essential to then, when I go back to the bigger scale, having a better understanding. Yeah. So they both rely on each other, and small scale you can get away with other things. There's tricks in both ways of making, and if you can do both, I think that's important. Yeah. To have the two going on at once. Yeah.
Has there been a specific drive or inspiration that unifies your current works here on view at Pace Gallery? So like an overall theme, or is it I know that you're working also, like you were mentioning before, memories and kind of internal. Yeah. Is it something specific that kind of unifies the show, or is it different elements kind of put together?
So mainly the notion behind this exhibition was all about touch, really simply, and I wanted to sort of, my mentality behind this group of paintings was actually something very, very, very small. Yeah. And because of that, I could exaggerate that small notion and really take it as far as possible. So the paintings upstairs are all subtly quite different. There's a thread that leads through them all, but it's really taking the notion of touch and trying to stretch it as far as possible through the painting. So there's obliteration of touch, then there's a hidden scene where there's this drawn line that's very much exposed and less edited or reworked or overlapped. So yeah, I think my drive was actually very, very simple, but from that notion, exaggerating that sensibility to the maximum was my whole kind of way around these paintings. Yeah.
And bringing them together.
Yeah.
In your work entitled Hidden Scene, you introduce swathes of raw linen to the surface of the painting. Can you tell me more about this painting and the incorporation of raw linen?
So the raw linen in Hidden Scene, yes, is sort of a collage, a concealing of information that was previously on the canvases before. I've always sort of used collage elements in my paintings as a way to mask off and sometimes push back information, because I have a tendency to overload, and then a way in tends to be to just cover up and basically start again, and it's similar to sort of scraping away, but with a large piece of linen, it's immediate. You know, that whole slice of painting is eliminated. But with that painting, the linen acts as a sort of, I was very interested in how trees were obscuring the landscape, basically, with these walks I was doing. And
in Cornwall?
In Cornwall, yeah. And then that happens in the city, but everything sort of, the horizon's sort of at face value. There's no, all the information is very much in your face. So there's that exists in the city, but in a different way.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I was basically, that painting is sort of, in a way, it doesn't give everything immediately, and that sort of collage interrupts and sort of, I think, sort of concealing elements of a painting and keeping someone guessing, and allowing a void to appear, but as a positive as well.
No, but it's really interesting to hear you talk about this, because when I saw it, I thought they were there, because I'm hearing words like covering or concealing, but when I saw it, I thought that it was, you know, to emphasize something.
Ah, okay.
Which is really interesting, right? Because I guess that they can have that double meaning. Because,
totally.
like you say, they hide something that was there before, but by hiding or creating this negative space, you're also lifting something to the forefront.
Yeah.
And then I thought it was interesting also because the material itself, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but do you prep your work, or you work usually kind of on these very raw canvases and materials?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so usually, I mean, I have a range, but it can be just raw linen with rabbit skin glue, or sometimes I prime it, and there's the white surface. So colour again behaves very differently on the different surfaces. But also sometimes I mask off areas, and then when I take it off, that linen comes back out. Yeah. So it is something I've been doing for a while, but it behaves in a different way. And I guess collage, as you say, when there's negative space, it can also be positive space and actually exist as a mark in its own right, or a drawn line. So playing with those different extremities in a painting, especially in hidden scene, I think it's really exaggerated and unavoidable that those strips are really quite dominant, and how then the painting awkwardly sort of works around that is quite interesting to me.
Yeah, and coming back to what we were talking about earlier, the whole idea of, you know, construction and deconstruction.
Yeah,
so that's something that's really interesting too.
Yeah.
Earlier this year, you were commissioned by Whitechapel Gallery to create 2 etchings to accompany the major exhibition titled Action, Gesture, Paint, Women Artists and Global Abstraction, 1940-1970. An exhibition that highlighted 150 paintings from an overlooked generation of 81 international women artists associated with the abstract expressionist movement. As a young artist, woman, and abstract painter, how did you feel to be asked and involved in that exhibition that brought to light such an important and overlooked legacy?
Yeah, I thought it was, I was really pleased to be asked to be involved, and I think the exhibition was intriguing. I think there were painters in there that you could see maybe due to life, their circumstance, maybe their position in the world, being a woman. Sometimes it was almost frustrating because the work, it kind of exposed the fact that they weren't able to pursue painting as much as you could tell they wanted to. So there was this kind of feeling of, slight frustration, or you just knew that these were brilliant minds, and somehow they were limited, and sometimes you could actually see that in the work, or you just felt like the full potential wasn't quite reached.
Yeah.
And it's unusual seeing, you know, these shows still existing now, with that kind of in mind of, you know, women having to kind of spell it out in that way. I think that moving forward, it's nice to think that that's going to happen less. And
what is next? What is on the horizon? Where should we look out for your work and follow your upcoming projects?
So I am working with Pace, represented with Pace, but at the moment, you know, this big show's just happened. I'm slowing down, looking a lot. I had a whole day in this gallery just before the opening, where I was just taking notes, looking, processing it all, and that's the most important thing, prioritising the studio, making sure that I'm in the right headspace to then paint again. I'm not going to rush it.
Yeah. Would you say that is important for, you know, a painter also? Obviously, work in different steps, and usually you're isolated for a long amount of time. You're kind of in your brain, in your studio, working away, and then all of a sudden the show is up. It's a big celebration, and would you say it's probably a big part of the process, right? To really come in and take it all in, and to be able to do that in you know, slow time. Yeah,
I think that's really accurate, because you live with these paintings in your studio and your relationship is very, very different. It's sort of this private moment, and you don't really think about the show or think about who may or may not be looking at the work.
Yeah.
Because if you do, I think that there's a sacrifice made, and you may not be actually making the work, I don't know, just for yourself. I think there's a special moment that you have to protect. And then when it does happen and the walls come down and it's all exposed, there's a huge shift and a letting go that needs to take place. And also just a sort of self-awareness of what actually you've done.
Yeah.
And when the works are isolated and on the white walls, you can see things more clearly. So I think it's really important to me to just stop everything, look, and not feel any urgent necessity to go straight back to the canvas, but take notes, and when it feels right, maybe go back. So that's why I'm taking things slow and not rushing to the next thing.
Wow. Well, I will look forward to your next show and continue to follow you. And
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. This has been what a treat.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely. It's been lovely.
The exhibition is so beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I am Angeliki, and this has been Give Me a Break, Dynamisk, in conversation with.